Um, Good morning. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks to those of you that have been with us for a little bit this morning. You got to listen to our banter, and maybe you were disappointed you didn't get to join in. So sorry that you were all on mute, but probably by next time we'll have a waiting room so you don't have to listen to us. We're getting this figured out. My name is Ray Pepley, and I am co-chair of PNACAC's Professional Development Committee. Palmer is my wonderful co-chair, but we're here today. Sorry, I missed that whole part. We're here today because you signed up to hear the wonderful Patrick O'Connor talk to us about connecting our students with scholarships. So if you're new today, and this is your first time joining us, this is our fourth webinar in our College Counseling 101 series that you've joined us for today. And so we're all three of us are volunteers, just have a heart to help high school counselors who are in the field connecting with high school students and wanting just the best for them and letting them know all their options. But that's why you get me, who doesn't know Zoom very well. So I'm fumble through some things. So thanks for your patience. But like I said, Patrick is our wonderful speaker today, and he has so much information. We've enjoyed his sharing with us the last webinars. So we look forward to that. Just a couple of housekeeping items before I forget. This webinar is being recorded. So if you need to jump out, if you're like me and this is your school day and you get emergencies or people that interrupt, please know that this is being recorded. And the recording, usually we have a little bit of a delay in uploading it to YouTube. So it takes probably about a week, but you'll get it before the holiday. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that chat is disabled, but Q&A is available, but others can't see it. But if you enter a comment or a question in Q&A, Palmer and I will see it, and then we will either respond to you in the Q&A, or we'll, if it's worthy of if it's something that the whole group needs to hear, then we will share that question. Anything, Palmer, that I?
No, I think that's exactly what we needed for housekeeping.
Okay,
so
awesome.
Thanks for joining us, Patrick.
Oh,
we're looking forward to hearing what you have to share with us.
Oh, thanks, Palmer. And again, many thanks for the chance to do this. It's wonderful to reach out to colleagues and work with great folks like yourself. And my heartfelt thanks to everybody who pulled some nice things together last time when I was unable at the last minute to join you to talk about financial aid. I truly was not feeling well. It wasn't that the thought of talking about financial aid scares me, even though it does. So my thanks to you, to everybody who made that possible. So today we're going to talk about scholarships, and can you all see what I'm typing on the screen? Because I did hit share.
Yes, we can.
Okay, awesome, great.
Good.
Okay,
so we can see all your typographical errors for the rest of the
oh yeah, well yeah, yeah, well yeah, as as people ask what method of typing do I use, and I say it's Columbus, discover and land. So we'll see what we can do. But I think before we get too far into talking about the nuts and bolts of scholarships, which is what we will do, of course, I would ask you to sort of ask yourself a couple of questions. First, what makes this different from what makes this different from applying to colleges? And I think, for folks who know, absolutely nothing about financial aid, I think that's a really important question to ask, because in some respects, your students are going to assume that this is sort of the same thing. Most of them have applied to college at this point. And so, they're going to look at this and say, well, it's the same deal. You go find some scholarships, you sort out the ones you like, and you apply for them. And maybe you have to write essays. So I think it's important to give some thought to that question, and we will address it in just a little bit. But I think that's I think that's part of it. I think the second question I would have, and again, this is just for you individually, but what's your goal with scholarships? What are you trying to do? because I think it's important, and I kind of hesitate to say this because, as most of you know, I'm a pretty big advocate for counselor education and the role of the counselor in the college process. That said, I have gone through most of my career with not a, I would say, less than maybe a 75% understanding of how financial aid works. Now that's financial aid, not scholarships. But let me just offer a word or two of advice. You know, you could spend an awful lot of time looking up all kinds of scholarships your kids are never going to use, just so you have the benefit of knowing what they are. But to me, that's sort of like, you know, after I did this for about 10 years, I came to the conclusion that given where I was and given the students I was working with, I probably didn't need to know all the water polo major D3 schools in Montana, because my kids were never going to go there. And if they did, I had gained the expertise at that point of knowing where to look to get those answers. But I didn't waste headspace doing that. And I would argue that that you should probably approach scholarships the same way. There's going to be a point where you will become familiar with the scholarships that are most popular with your students, that most directly affect your students. And I think understanding those is very important. But at the same time, I would say, you know, knowing every detail of every scholarship, that's not the way you need to go. Quick story on this. So I was putting together, when I was the college counselor at Roper School in Birmingham, Michigan, I was putting together my paying for college night. By the way, I don't call it financial aid night, never have. It's always paying for college, because the discussion isn't just about the FAFSA, and it isn't just about for folks in need. You know, I once had a father who came to me and I said, so I'll see you tonight for paying for college. And he said, no, I'm going to skip it. And I said, well, let me ask you something. If you had to pay for a brand new car for every year for 4 years, would you be able to do it without help? And he said, well, no, I'd need to figure out what I could do in terms of what my options are. And I said, yeah, that's why you need to come to paying for college night. Because you need those strategies, even if you're fairly well off. It's important to really get a strategy going for paying for college. So anyway, I was setting up paying for college night, and our speaker came, and he was going to talk about the FAFSA, and he was director of financial aid of a pretty popular school here in the state. And so I said, well, you know, this one mom wanted to be here tonight to ask this question, and she can't. So I'm going to ask you, and if you could, I'll bring the answer back for her. And I asked the question, and he sort of just went into automatic pilot and started giving the answer, and he got halfway through the answer. He was halfway through the answer, and he said, oh no, wait, those rules just changed this morning. This morning. So it was at that point where I thought, you know, I'm going to leave part of this expertise with paying for college up to the colleges, and encourage my parents to establish communications with them. And that's the case when it comes to either financial aid or scholarships. The one key advice that I would offer as we get going here is to make sure parents call the financial aid office. The minute they get their award, they should actually read the award about 3 or 4 times. And then even if they think they understand it, they really need to call the financial aid office, and here's why. I had a parent do this, and the parent called and said, you know, we're thrilled you accepted my daughter. We're delighted that we're going to get some help. I just want to make sure I fully understand what we're getting into. And at that point, they stopped talking, and the financial aid officer pulled up the student's file and said, oh, well, your child qualified for merit money, and we weren't able to offer her the maximum because we had offered it to so many other students. But now we have some students saying no, so we can give you an additional $10,000 in scholarship. Is that okay with you? Now, that never would have happened had the parent not called the financial aid office. So as you think about scholarships, as you think about financial aid, make sure that they understand, that your parents understand that while the numbers are sometimes fixed, many times they're not. And getting the advice of a professional who does this for a living or free at the college is really, pretty important. So I would suggest you keep that in mind. Excuse me. Okay, so with that in mind, let's sort of drill down on scholarships for just a minute. The key here is to understand that most of them will come from the institution. Most of the scholarships your students are going to be looking at will be coming from the place where they're actually going to go to college. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't try and supplement it, but it does mean that even at the end of the day, most of that money is going to come from the institution itself. Now, the good news is that most colleges, or I should say many colleges, when your student applies, they automatically review them for all those little obscure scholarships that nobody's heard of. So, for example, we have one here in Michigan. A college has a scholarship that's available for people from the Upper Peninsula, from the rural north, who happen to be on the debate team. Well, in order to make sure that connection is made, the college reviews every scholarship to determine if they qualify for that scholarship, and literally in most cases the hundreds of other little scholarships that alumni have donated and have thoughtfully put together. So the first thing that you need to know about your particular school is, do they review for scholarships automatically? Now, again, most of the time that the answer to that is going to be yes. In some cases, it's a mix. So, for example, the University of Chicago does this review of little scholarships, but the big ones, the half ride, the full ride, that actually does require a separate application. So for the schools that are most popular, I would say for starters, do what I would call a top 10 review. Look at the 10 most popular colleges your kids go to and be familiar with their scholarship policy as a place to begin. Okay, so I would say that's definitely going to be kind of important, right? Okay, the second thing, of course, and perhaps for some of you this is the first thing, but you're going to want to take a look at the state programs. So if here in Michigan, we've had the good fortune of having new funding show up for scholarships. Which has been a great thing, but these scholarships tend to be pretty stable. Eligibility rules tend to be the same, qualifications, application process, but get to know them, because in most cases, students are going to be eligible for that as a resident. Now, the other question, of course, that you want to know is, do they have to go to college in the state? And the answer to that could surprise you. We have a couple of programs here in Michigan where no matter where you go to school, whether it's in Michigan or outside of Michigan, you are considered for all these scholarships. And so that's important. So, you know, starting from scratch, I would say, familiar with the scholarship policy of the top 10 colleges your kids apply to, and become familiar with your state programs to see if they have to go to college in state and what the application requirements are for those particular programs. That's pretty important. So that matters a great deal. The issue, and this is actually one that that some people are still not familiar with, and it's happening less and less. But there are indeed, the question sometimes comes, if the student, let's say they apply for your local VFW scholarship of $300 and they win it, will the college then reduce the amount of aid they're giving the student by $300? Which of course means it's not really worth the student's time to bother to apply to scholarships, period. In most cases, the answer to that question is no. In many cases, however, the answer is they will deduct $300 from the financial aid package your student gets, and they will start by reducing the loan. So that's a huge incentive. If that's the policy that that particular college has, that's a huge incentive to have for students to apply for outside scholarships, because if that whacks away at the loan part, boy, that's, you know, that's serious money right there. So yeah, some people say this is an urban myth. Other folks have said, no, that's not the case. I know there are some colleges that still do this. And so it will be important for you, or more important for your student or parent, to call the office and say, well, okay, you know, we're about ready to apply for scholarships. What will an outside scholarship do to my financial aid eligibility at your institution? And so I think that's kind of an important next step as far as that goes. Now, in terms of scholarships themselves, you know, we usually put them in two pools, right? There are the local scholarships, which are sometimes surprisingly abundant, and typically, and I don't mean to offend anybody, but they typically are sometimes pretty small also. So you know, sometimes the task here will be getting your students to have the desire to apply for a $200 or $300 scholarship. That's, again, well made, well intended from the music boosters, or the VFW, or anybody. But they tend to be small. They also tend to require information. This guy who are putting it together, and they just want to make sure it's going to be put to good use, and not to somebody who's going to be in college for a semester and then, you know, leave. So, you know, one of the things, and I've worked in several public school buildings where they had scholarships. One of the things that you want to try and do as you work with your local scholarship folks is encourage them to minimize the amount of paperwork necessary. It's, you know, if it's an application and 3 essays and 3 letters of recommendation, that's going to be a tough sell to a kid who's just written a lot of essays to get into college, period. So you want to work with your local folks and require a little less information on their part, and have them sort of try and shape a good process. Now, a couple of very forward-thinking high schools that I've worked with and know of actually got together and brought their local scholarship folks into the building. They bought them lunch and said, we really appreciate what you're doing. But we don't think we're getting as many kids to apply for your scholarship because the application processes for all of your scholarships are so different. We don't say that they're too big. We just say that they're different. And in this case, what these school districts did was they took a summer and put together sort of a common scholarship, local scholarship application, right? So again, just like the Common App, just like SCORE, just like, all those others, the whole idea is that the student puts in their vital information once. There's one transcript going out. There's one, hopefully, one letter of recommendation, if that, and there's the same essay. So this does two things. First, it makes it a whole lot easier to sell the notion of local scholarships to your students. Second, it also increases the applicant pile, because obviously if it's easier to apply for the scholarship, they really are going to see it as free money, and they're going to be more inclined to apply. Now, I must admit that even in the schools where I worked, where they successfully did this, there were a couple of places that were like, well, yeah, okay, but this is a music scholarship, so we really have to say, do the common thing, but you also need to send us paragraph exists. And that's, folks are going to be willing to be reasonable if they understand that more people are going to apply for their scholarship, because that's what they want. The last thing you want to do is have a local scholarship hanging out there in the wind that that doesn't get applied for, or where the numbers are pretty bad. So so if you sort of frame this from the perspective that says, well, if you're willing to do this, we think we can increase the number of interested applicants, they're going to be more inclined to make some changes and feel like that's okay. So now in terms of getting the students, to actually do these scholarships, my question to all the students who are like, well, I don't know, it's only $300, is, what's 12 times $300? If there are a dozen local scholarships out there that you have a pretty good chance of winning, you're not talking about getting $300. You're talking about getting $3,000, maybe even more. So it's a good idea, as students are like, well, it's only this, it's only that. Yeah, I get it. $200 is a biology book if you're lucky. It's not even a full credit hour. But again, this is one of those things where it's like you chip away at it and suddenly, you're looking at a bigger solution. And I also quite honestly believe that's a pretty good life skill for students to understand that, sometimes you don't solve the problem with one big piece of dynamite. Sometimes you solve it by chipping away at it over time. But in any case, I think to try and sell the notion that the local scholarships are worthwhile, I think the key is to try and streamline the application process with the support of the local committee, and also to encourage students by telling them that these little scholarships add up, because they really do. And I think that's important as well. So, and then finally, when we talk about local scholarships, again, counselors don't have a lot of free time. We don't have any free time. But it wouldn't be a bad idea at some point to take 5 minutes to sit down with your principal, maybe even your board chair, your school board chair, anybody involved in groups like Kiwanis or the business roundtable in your community, and say, look, we've got some kids who are really interested in going to college, but they could use a little more support on the local front. Is there anybody around that you know of who might be interested in starting a scholarship for our particular students? That does take a little more work, and of course it does take a little more time. But again, if you don't really have a scholarship going community, this is another way of getting that going. But don't try and do it yourself. There are key folks in your school who are really good at raising awareness and connecting friends and raising money. So tap into those folks and see what you can do to try and create a larger local scholarship sense of community. And I think that would be helpful as well. So that I think would be, my advice in general about local scholarships. I think they're great. I think they're great community builders, and certainly making sure those folks have some kind of presence at an awards assembly is of vital interest as well. So, okay. So then we get to the regional and the national scholarships. Now, usually the first question I get is what are the sites that are really very effective? And for me, the answer for a very long time has always been finaid.org, and then also campus. So, those two places have been, I think, particularly effective. But having said that, I have to be honest with you, I know there are a lot of people who have a built-in scholarship website with their application materials, with their application software, and they're very happy with it. And I know that there are folks who just simply put up, who do a Google of scholarship searches and find a search that meets their need. So, there are a lot out there. What I would suggest you do, and of course, this region, it may very well be that my kids here in Michigan did well with those two lists. But at the same time, that may not necessarily be the case for your neck of the woods. So, I would say, gather the names of 4 or 5 websites and try them out. Okay. And so you have to put together, develop a common student profile. And fill everyone out the same way. Okay. And then quite honestly, see what you get. And you may be surprised to find there are places that have a lot more than others do. And that might not have any at all. Now that's one of the reasons you fill out the profile, but there's also another reason you need to do that. Okay. First of all, you have to measure each scholarship website for its ease of use. If the students have to do most of the digging, there's a good chance they're not going to want to. And we'll talk about that in a second. On the other hand, there are websites out there that once a student creates an account, if a news scholarship appears on the calendar that might be of help to the student, the website will actually email the student directly and say, hey, we found a new scholarship for you. So, there's an excellent chance that would be of real value. I know of one also that has sends emails about upcoming deadlines. We think you'll be eligible for these scholarships and their deadline is coming up next week. Don't forget this. So I think that's important. So you're evaluating for ease of use. Of course, you are evaluating for search results, but you're also sort of looking just for vibe or privacy issues. You always have to watch out when scholarships are involved, because there are many parents who are willing to do all kinds of things in the interest of helping their kids, and it ends up hurting them. Like bogus websites for filling out financial aid, bogus websites for claiming that they are a scholarship when in fact they are not. So, you're going to want to you're going to want to sort of take a look at each of these sites to make sure that the recommendations they're making are strong and reputable. And the best way to do that is to pick a few at random and then look at the actual application itself and see if it makes sense for, see if you're comfortable with that. So, you know, again, good. It's a pretty quick exercise. You know, you decide you're a 3.4 flute player who wants to play D2 soccer. And then, you know, off you go from, and, you know, one parent is a veteran. Apply that same information into every single scholarship search and see what it brings you. And if you don't have time to do this, quite honestly, I would encourage you to have the kids do it because, you know, it's their education. So if they need to take a look and then try and sort out the ones that make the most amount of sense, that wouldn't be a bad piece of homework for them to have to do. I think that's really important. Now, whether we're talking local scholarship or national scholarship, you know, again, I'm a little bit old school here, but you know, unlike college admissions, I would discourage you or your students from paying to apply for any scholarship whatsoever. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense that folks who need money for college are paying to try and find it. And so one of the first keys that sort of always raised my eyebrows a little bit was the notion that the students had to actually pay to apply for money they need for school. Yeah, no, don't really see that happening. So so do keep that in mind as well. Okay, good, great. Okay, so let's go back for a second then to our first question, because the question basically is this different from applying for schools? Well, again, as I said, the problem is, I believe the answer is yes, by the way. And I think the problem is there are a couple of challenges that you're overcoming. First, in most cases, the deadlines for scholarships are January and February. In other words, after the student has applied to college. So the challenge there is you know, you've just had a student, there was new data yesterday that said the average student is now applying to 10 to 12 colleges. Well, you know, that's a little bit of work, even if it's name, address, and phone number 12 times. So, you know, at this point, your students may be a little bit on college admissions burnout. They just might want to say, you know, tell me who let me in and I'm going to go and leave me alone. And of course, the challenge is that those options could be minimized because the student doesn't have enough financial resources. And so the challenge can sometimes be getting the student to apply to a scholarship, especially if it's involving several essays or several letters of recommendation. If the process is too much like applying to another college, there's really a good chance the student's just not going to bother to get around to it. And so, you know, you need to find some ways to incentivize the students. Or in other words, give them a reason to apply. And mine was always kind of, I never really sort of beat around the bush with this one. And you know, it was pretty simple. It's like, well, okay, who's paying for this? You know, and this could in fact lead to some kind of mini presentation on awareness of loan repayment. And I am one of those folks who is a huge advocate as part of your paying for college program to address this topic and say, look, you know, you know, you can get the money. There's this thing out there called plus loans, which I think are just as dangerous could be, where folks who do not have a lot of experience with debt management can basically write themselves a complete check. So So I think there may need to be some awareness of loan repayment that, yeah, this is a little bit of work, but if you manage to pull away $1,000 in scholarships, here's what that'll do to your loan repayment program in the future. So I think you really want to give some thought to making sure that the students understand that there should be a good reason to do this. Now, the other option, or another option, that sometimes works is to just simply say to the student, okay, I get it. You're a senior, it's second semester, it's third trimester. You want to get back to being a student and doing prom and doing all those great things that you're going to remember for the rest of your life. So let's do this. Let's pick a 90-minute period sometime during the week that's relatively free most of the time. And that's when you do all of your scholarship stuff. That's where you search for them. That's where you apply for them. That's where you write the essays. And that's it. Applying to college, you apply to 10 colleges, that sort of takes over your life, and it's not always easy to schedule that time. But with scholarships, it tends to be a little bit easier. It can be a little bit easier because in most cases, it's not as complex as applying to a college. So just simply say to a student, okay, I get it. You don't want to spend 8 hours a week doing this. Let's find 90 minutes, and that's what you're going to do, and that's going to be the end of it. And then just kind of leave it at that. So, that's another method that's been fairly effective. And so I think that's kind of important. So, it is easy to understand from the student's perspective why this may look like similar issues, but to applying to college. But there are some important differences. The biggest single ones, quite frankly, are motivation, because, like I said, they're a little tired of writing about essays right now. Of course, there is always the possibility that they can, recycle a college application essay. You probably don't want to do that with the financial aid from the same college, but that could actually work as well. So that's where we are with that. Okay, so then sometimes we also get the question, okay, so counselors are busy people. What should you put your emphasis on? Well, this is actually a tougher question than you think, simply because there are such big differences. There are scholarships, national scholarships, that are worth tens of thousands of dollars, and there are local scholarships that are worth hundreds of dollars. And so, that if the application process is the same, you'd be wiser to try and apply for the national scholarship, and that's what most students do. The mistake, of course, that they make is they don't realize that if they found out about this through a college scholarship website, an international college scholarship website, so did a couple of thousand other people. And so, you're sort of looking at bigger scholarships that have a much larger applicant pool versus smaller scholarships that tend to have a less numerous applicant pool. It's easy, again, for the kids to think, well, it's just a small scholarship. What difference does it make? But again, that's part of the whole financial awareness piece. So yeah, you could have a tough time based on the amount, but the counter there is to say, the Coca-Cola scholarship's a great scholarship, but there are 300,000 I'm making that up, but there's a ton of applicants for the Coca-Cola scholarship, and so that it gets much more competitive and much more selective. Does somebody ultimately win the Coca-Cola scholarship? Of course they do, and that could be that student. But again, with national scholarships, that has a national audience, which tends to be significantly larger than a local scholarship. So, my advice there is try and balance both. Certainly one way to do this is to use the criterion as your guide. So if there's a national scholarship that's open to, folks who are interested in, say, physics, who have actually had experience working in a physics lab, and you have a kid who does that. Well, okay, that's narrowing the audience pretty significantly. And it would, in my judgment, it would be worth that student's time to go ahead and complete that scholarship application. But, there are others where it's like, if it's like, I know Kellogg's had one for many years, and basically it was just name, address, and phone number. Well, it is a scholarship, but it's a sweepstakes approach. And so, that has sort of a different draw, a different odds of winning, that might not necessarily make it worth the student's time. So, again, I realize the amounts are better, and that's why I would encourage you to do both. But that's important as well. Okay. Right. Okay. The other thing that students often do not look at when they're looking at a scholarship is if it's renewable or not. In many cases, particularly for the larger awards, these tend to be one-time things that'll help you pay for freshman year, but then that's pretty much it. Again, these are private scholarships. These are not scholarships offered through the colleges, but these are those private national scholarships. Every local scholarship I know of is a one-time deal. They want to help you out. They want to get you started as a freshman, give you a little more time, give your parents a little more time to put some funds together. But those are very rarely more than 1 year. We used to have the good fortune here in the Michigan area of the Detroit area of having somebody who paid for a scholarship at the University of Michigan that was a full ride for 4 years, cost of attendance, not just tuition, but cost of attendance for 4 years. And the only requirement was, these folks were a little old school. The only requirement was that the student had to actually sit down and write a letter, an old school put in US mail letter once a month to the committee to let them know how things are going. That seems like a really small price to me to pay for being able to go to a college that's going to cost you over $100,000 over 4 years. But again, that was unfortunately an exception. So you want to find out if it's renewable, if it is, or even if it isn't. You might want to figure out if you can reapply for it the following year or have to in order to be considered eligible for it. Obviously, this is true with FAFSA. And so that the case also exists for some scholarships where they'll be happy to consider you again, or as long as you're able to, reapply for the scholarship, but they're going to make you do that. They're not going to trust that the first application did the trick. So again, these are smaller things to look at in the larger scheme of life. So I think that's pretty important as well. So okay, yeah. So then, we got a question here that asks about D3 athletic scholarships, and I'm supposed to say that D3 schools don't offer athletic scholarships because they can't, and leave it at that. And as much as I'd like to, I think the reality is that I think we all know that somehow there are some places where the athletes get a lot more support at D3 schools than the academic scholarship folks. And basically, the way that the best way to approach that is, again, to talk to their coach, because the thing about coaches is they are the greatest advocates of college counseling as long as they want you. If they want you on the team, they will move heaven and earth. I worked at one high school where the athletic director basically was, had his own office at college counseling, because anytime a student wanted a scholarship or qualified for a school and the college really wanted him, he was there to make sure that the test scores got sent, that the materials got sent out, the coaches are usually all over this. If there are D3 schools that it's a fair question to say, well, my students' hobbies include athletics, video games, and pursuing the perfect pizza. Are there any scholarships available at your institution through that? You probably want to avoid the direct question, do you offer athletic scholarships? Because they're going to tell you no, because if they don't, the NCAA is going to come in their footsteps tomorrow and say, well, so much about your D3 status. So you have to sort of, be subtle as you approach this, but simply raise the issue that among their hobbies include some great work as an athlete, and are there any scholarships available for that? Well, okay, so that's kind of all I have. Let's we'll turn it back to you guys for Q&A or comments from the field. And again, appreciate your attention and hope this was at least somewhat helpful in terms of scholarships and financial aid.
Yeah, we have about 10 minutes left. We actually have just one question here in the Q&A, but others may come in. Question was, could a student actually be on the hook to repay a scholarship? For instance, if they dropped out between semesters or mid-semester. And Patrick, I don't know if you have any feedback on that. I think I have some ideas, but I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, well, Palmer, I'll certainly turn the floor over to you, but I can tell you that from experience, I can tell you the answer to that is it depends on from college to college. But there is no universal answer there. So, there are some cases where the student, in order to remain eligible, has to maintain a certain GPA. But there are also situations where if they don't maintain a certain GPA after the first semester, the scholarship goes away completely. And there are also cases where if the student leaves, the college will ask them to read the scholarship. Now, I don't know of any private scholarship that has that requirement, but it's not to say they don't exist.
Yeah, my only thought would be, I've never seen a situation where a student had to repay a scholarship if they didn't, for instance, if they left between semesters. But if a student left midterm, then there are refund policies that I think are dictated by federal regulation that the universities follow. I'm not sure how that would interplay with institutional or private scholarships, but that's the only time I think we would see a repayment issue.
Yep, good point.
My camera, sorry, Patrick, my camera won't let me turn on since you're my host. You're my host. But I was just going to mention something interesting that happened to me as a parent. I didn't know that this would happen, but one of my kids, he had a scholarship come in kind of late to the college, and the first semester had already been paid. College actually turned around and wrote him a check for that scholarship. And I guess I would have just assumed as a high school counselor that the college would have just applied it to next semester, but they didn't. So I just thought I'd share that with others because that's something I didn't know would happen.
Yeah, well, and Ray, you make a good point, and something that I sort of overlooked, which is particularly with these local scholarships, the students and the parents need to understand where the money is going to be sent.
Right.
And very often the local scholarship will be given in the student's name to the student.
Correct. Yeah.
And that's kind of a different deal. But in cases where it actually goes to the college, the student is going to have to assume some responsibility for following up and making sure that that all works out the way it's supposed to.
Right. We have some other great questions. What are some of the ways you promote scholarships to students' families? Example, school website, emails to students and families, individual meetings. These are things we do, but still have so many students who don't apply or don't know about scholarships.
Yeah, well, and that's really where the parallel between that and applying to college rings true to me. If I were to say if I were asked what's the single best way to apply to raise awareness of applying to college, there is no single best answer. It's it's websites, it's newsletters, it's word of mouth, it's but I think some of the more, intriguing ones that I'm starting to see are, for example, counselors that put up a scholarship table at the basketball game on Tuesday and Friday night at halftime. And instead of waiting for the audience to come to them, they simply go to the audience. And that can work well, particularly in local schools where everybody spends most of their time in the gym on Tuesday or Friday night, and most of the community is there. I'd say certainly if you want to get the support of local businesses where the kids hang out, if it's a skate shop, if it's a Dairy Queen, if it's whatever, keeping access there and getting in front of their faces, getting that person to be an advocate for you can be a huge step in the right direction as well. So anything you're doing for college, you should be doing for scholarships as well. But those two in particular seem to be particularly popular right now.
Yeah. May I also share something that I've discovered through the years that I went away from and then came back to, was using Remind. So I invite my senior class. So I have about 360 at the moment. And Remind only allows you to have 150 participants per class. So I had to create 2 different classrooms, and I just send out scholarships through Remind, and with just a brief explanation, like, this is a VFW scholarship, must be a child of a descendant of a veteran of foreign war. And then there's the link to the scholarship. And that's been my best method of engaging seniors. And I say that just because that has been their feedback to me. They don't want to look at it on my website or in a newsletter. They want it on their phone. Just meeting that generation, right?
Oh yeah.
If we got it on TikTok, probably would work too, but yeah, I'm too old for that.
Yeah, no, when I used to run a high school counseling, a college counseling newsletter, a student actually came in, and this was even a while ago, and said, yeah, look, is there any way you could just like text this to me? Mm-hmm. And can you text me how to get into college? And I said, yeah, if I did, I wouldn't be working here, that's for sure. So but no, you raise a good point, Ray, particularly if Remind allows you to throw a link in there. One and done, hit and run, that's this generation.
Yep.
Although I do wonder if it'd be good to remind students that perhaps it's not best to do the scholarship applications on their phone.
Yeah. Well, the good point there, Palmer. Yeah, you definitely want to avoid that if you can.
Patrick, maybe, and Ray, maybe you might have feedback on this. Someone's asking, what are some examples of materials you would have on a scholarship table during an event?
Ooh,
yeah,
great question.
Ray,
go ahead.
I think many of us have like a quick sheet that has the scholarship databases on there. So I have one in my career center that has, God, there's probably like 20 that I have on my list with a disclaimer. I was going to mention, Patrick, I liked your idea of us, the counselors, kind of vetting those scholarship databases, because I did that with scholarships.com. And so I can see what students might get in their email box. But when I have that paper, when I hand out that resource, it says, these are the scholarship databases. I encourage students to only truly just sign up for one, because otherwise their inboxes they blow up, and then they stop looking at their emails from colleges, and they miss very valuable information.
Yeah.
But I would do that maybe if a printout of one, maybe like print out the Burger King scholarship app, or just show like kind of what it looks like. I don't know, other people probably have great ideas.
Yeah, no, the other thing that I know that a lot of folks include are the top 10 mistakes students make when applying to scholarships. That's an easy Google search. It's right there. And so, you see that. And I think, I suppose the other thing that I've never done, but could probably help, is, every class, you tend to get that one student who does apply for 10 local scholarships and ends up with $2,000. Get that student to write up their experience and what it meant to, because, especially this time of year, the thing that really sells is when students get the chance to talk to students who have been through the process.
100%.
So something like that could be real helpful.
Well, and Patrick, I think we're showing our age here when you say ask them to write that up. Maybe if we could do a quick video of
There you
them
go.
talking about the experience, that might be more effective.
Exactly.
A question
Okay.
is here. Are either of you familiar with the scholarship platform Going Merry? That's a new one to me.
Oh,
Going
no.
Merry. Okay.
I've never used it,
Okay.
but I've heard of it.
Yeah. Yeah. You might want to jump on the NACAC exchange and see if you can get some feedback on that.
And then there's a little thread here in the Q&A. Patrick, what have you observed over the years about students who do go and seek outside scholarships and then have colleges reduce their other aid dollar for dollar afterwards? Because that's not something I've observed except in the most rare of situations. So
yeah, Palmer, I would, to be honest with you, I would say the colleges that I talked to that where the students asked me to raise them, I would say in my experience about half of them have such a policy. But they are very quick to point out that the first reduction is in loan, not in grant.
right.
So,
right.
So it's still, sometimes students are like, well, I'm not going to bother. And it's like, well, no, wait. If all of a sudden college costs $2,000 less and you still have to pay a loan. So I think that message sometimes gets lost in the sauce.
We have a couple of comments here about Going Merry that came into the Q&A.
Yeah.
Folks who have said that it's been very helpful, that it's their students' favorite database. Let me just read this one quote. This year, I had our families complete our FAFSA. I can't read. This year, I had our families complete their FAFSA using Going Merry, just like TurboTax for taxes, and it helped with the overall number of students who completed the FAFSA. And now that you say that, Siobhan, now I do remember hearing about Going Merry, but I don't know anything about it really. Advice for students. Go ahead, Patrick. Sorry.
I was just going to say, Palmer, if it sounds like based on that comment that it sounds like Going Merry may be taking the Q&A approach that TurboTax does, and if that's the case, more power to them. Because I've been trying to get the federal government to do that with FAFSA forever. So it's just more engaging. It's more humane. So, yeah. So,
do you have advice for students as far as scholarships who are taking a gap year? I didn't word that very well, but students taking a gap year, how does that impact the scholarship process?
Well, in that case, generally speaking, if the scholarship is to the college, the financial aid offer will remain the same, and students taking gap years need to understand that. So if they get a scholar, if they're admitted and they get a financial aid package, and then the cost goes up 8%, your financial aid package isn't going to change. So if it's college financing, that's a real important thing to keep in mind. If it's a private scholarship, that's really up to the discretion of the provider of the scholarship itself, and that will vary greatly from person to person.
I think we're just about out of time. Let me throw this one last question that I have no idea. Are there any good social media pages related to this that might be helpful to students? Social media sites or people to follow? Off the top of my head, nothing's coming to my mind.
Yeah. No, all the good social media sites I know are really much more driven towards admissions rather than scholarship, to be honest with you. So again, good question for the NACAC exchange. I would say throw it out there and see what you get.
Anything else, Ray, before we wrap up? You're muted, mate. Ray.
Sorry, our announcements were playing, so I muted myself and then forgot. No, I was just thinking that, man, this is such a great topic, and I'm sure people have great advice or tips that they've used the last few years of practice. So I'm wondering if we're probably going to need to revisit this again, maybe into the next year. So yeah, you can see it's something that all of us are passionate about.
Thank you very
Yeah.
much, Patrick.
Yeah, thanks,
And
Patrick.
we'll look forward to seeing you again in January for our next webinar.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Patrick?
Everybody have good, safe time away. Be thoughtful to yourselves and be good to yourselves, and don't check your email as much as you think you need to.
Great advice. Good advice.
All right. See
Thanks,
you guys soon.
everyone, for joining.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.